I never thought a single glance could flip everything inside me, like someone flicked on a light in a dark room where I'd been hiding for years. That evening, I sat in the corner of Moonlit Brew, clutching a mug of cold coffee, while a guy with a guitar sang on stage like his voice could heal any wound. His name was Ryan. I learned from the flyer by the door. He caught my eye, smiled and winked, and I felt my cheeks burn, my heart racing faster than it should. But then someone at the next table muttered something sharp about guys like him, and I, as always, chickened out, grabbed my stuff, and slipped outside, leaving a sketch of Ryan on a napkin. Why do I always run when something real knocks on my door? My name is Luke Hayes. I'm 35 years old. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I moved here from New York 6 months ago, hoping the mountains and quiet would help me forget the past. I'm an artist, illustrating books, but lately, my pencils sit untouched. That evening, I went to the cafe because Emma, the owner of Moonlit Brew, insisted. She said the open mic was a chance to get inspired, but I felt out of place among the laughing crowd and the smell of fresh coffee. Ryan sang about roads, stars, losing yourself, and finding your way back. His voice was low, slightly raspy, and I couldn't stop watching his fingers strum the guitar. I pulled out a pencil and started sketching on a napkin. His silhouette, messy hair, the line of his jaw. It was automatic, like my hands knew something I wasn't ready to admit. When he finished, the room erupted in applause, and he looked right at me. His smile felt like he saw through me, and I panicked. Too many feelings, too fast. I was about to order another coffee to stay longer, but then a guy at the next table, with a thick beard and a checkered shirt, leaned toward his friend and said something like, "These city boys think they can bring their ways here." His tone dripped with disdain, and I knew he meant Ryan. Maybe it was the way Ryan carried himself, how he looked at people openly, not hiding who he was. My stomach twisted. I was used to those looks in New York, but here in Asheville, they felt sharper, closer. I didn't want to be part of that scene, didn't want anyone noticing how I'd been watching Ryan. I tossed a couple of bucks on the table, grabbed my backpack, and stepped into the cool evening air. Asheville's streets glowed under the streetlights, and I walked without looking back until the cafe was out of sight. But that napkin sketch I left behind stuck in my mind. I knew Ryan would find it. Waiters always clean the tables. The thought made me feel scared and warm at the same time. Would I go back to that cafe? Or would I hide again, like I always do? I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by boxes I never unpacked, flipping through an old sketchbook where every page screamed of pain I was trying to forget. My ex, David, left me for his career, and his betrayal still burned like a fresh wound. I stumbled on a sketch I'd drawn that night at Moonlit Brew, Ryan's silhouette, his guitar, his smile. My fingers froze, and I scribbled over the drawing so hard the pencil tore the paper. Why can't I just let this go? Why does one evening at a cafe make me feel so exposed? The next day, Emma called and, as usual, wouldn't let me hide. "Luke, you've got to come back to the open mic," she said, her voice warm but firm. "There was something special there. I saw how you looked at the stage." I mumbled something vague, trying to change the subject, but she wouldn't let up. Emma always knew how to break through my walls, but I wasn't ready to talk about Ryan. Or about how his wink that night made my heart race like I was a teenager again. I tried to distract myself with work, but my illustrations for a children's book I was working on came out flat. I was drawing a forest full of magical creatures, but all I could see was Ryan, his fingers on the guitar strings, his gaze that seemed to dare me to be braver. I put the pencil down and stared out the window, where Asheville's mountains loomed over the city, calm and indifferent. Moving here was supposed to be a fresh start, but I felt just as lost as I did in New York. That evening, I went to a local bookstore, hoping to find some inspiration. While flipping through a poetry collection, someone bumped into me. I turned to see a woman with bright red hair who apologized and smiled. "You're that guy from the cafe, right?" she said. "I saw you sketching during Ryan's set." My face heated up, and I muttered that I was just capturing the scene. She nodded, but her eyes sparkled like she knew more than I was willing to admit. Back home, I opened my sketchbook again. Sketches of David, drawn when we were together, sat next to the new one of Ryan. I stared at them, comparing as if I could find answers in the lines and shadows. David was cold, calculated, his smile never reaching his eyes. Ryan, though, his face on paper was alive, full of warmth, and that scared me. I didn't want to open my heart again, didn't want to take the risk. But something about that sketch, the way I'd captured him, made me think maybe I'd already taken the first step. I went to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Thoughts of the cafe, of Ryan, of the napkin I'd left behind swirled in my head. What if he found it? And what if I actually went back there, despite the fear? I stood in the middle of Asheville's farmers market, surrounded by the smell of fresh bread and the sound of street musicians, when someone called my name, and that voice stirred feelings I'd been trying hard to bury. It was Ryan, holding a basket of apples, his smile as bright as the sunlight filtering through the trees. He spotted me while I was awkwardly picking out tomatoes and walked over like we were old friends. "Luke, what, you hiding from good coffee now?" he teased, and I felt my cheeks flush again, betraying me. Why does being around him make me feel so alive and so terrified at the same time? We started talking as we wandered between the stalls, and his easygoing nature was infectious. Ryan told me about growing up in Asheville's suburbs, how his family went to church every Sunday, and how everything changed when he came out as gay. "They said they'd pray for me," he said, staring at the mountains in the distance. But I didn't want to be fixed. His voice was steady, but I noticed his fingers tighten on the basket. I wanted to say something, but the words caught in my throat, and I just nodded, feeling his story echo inside me. Out of nowhere, Ryan suggested showing me a local waterfall not far from town. "You're new to Asheville, gotta introduce you to some real beauty," he said, and to my surprise, I agreed. We hopped into his beat-up pickup, and half an hour later, we were hiking down a trail surrounded by greenery. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and soon we stood by a small waterfall, its spray sparkling in the sun. Ryan kicked off his sneakers and stepped onto the slick rocks, calling me to follow. "Come on, Luke, don't be scared," he shouted, and though I hesitated, I went after him. When I slipped, Ryan grabbed my hand to steady me. His palm was warm, and that simple touch made my heart stop. We stood there for a few seconds, the water roaring around us, and I felt his gaze searching for mine. "You okay?" he asked, still holding my hand, and I mumbled something incoherent, looking away. But inside, everything was burning, not from fear, but from something new I couldn't name. We drove back to town as the sun began to set, and Ryan dropped me off at my place. "See you at the cafe?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with hope. I nodded, not sure if I'd keep that promise. When I closed my apartment door, my mind spun with the moment at the waterfall, his hand, his look. I knew I wanted to see him again, but fear still whispered that I wasn't ready. Would I go to the cafe, or hide behind my walls again? I never thought one snide comment could bring back all my fears, like someone opened a door to the past where I hid from judging eyes. At the farmer's market, while I was buying honey from a local vendor, a familiar voice made me turn around. It was Michael Brown, an old friend of Ryan's family, with a stern face and a gaze that cut right through. He was staring at me and Ryan, standing by a stall with fresh herbs, his lips curling into a sneer. "City habits making their way here now, huh?" he said loudly, for everyone to hear. My heart clenched, and I felt the old fear locking me in place. Why can't I just brush off words like that? Ryan and I had just come back from the waterfall, and I could still feel the warmth of his hand, his laugh as he helped me cross the rocks. But now, under Michael's glare, that warmth vanished, replaced by cold dread. Ryan just shrugged, saying to Michael, "Just living the best we can, Mr. Brown." His voice was steady, but I saw his eyes darken, betraying the hurt he tried to hide. I wanted to back him up, to say something, but my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth, and I just stared at the ground. When Michael walked off, Ryan turned to me and smiled, but it was forced. "Don't let it get to you, Luke, he's always like that," he said, but I noticed his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. I nodded, mumbling something about being in a hurry, and left, feeling like a coward. The whole walk home, I replayed his words, his look, and how easily Michael made me doubt everything. Asheville felt safe to me, but the suburbs, with their strict churches and whispers, reminded me not everyone here was ready to accept people like us. At home, I opened my sketchbook and started drawing, but instead of landscapes or book characters, my hands traced Ryan's face, not the one I saw at the waterfall, but the one at the market, with a shadow of pain in his eyes. I stared at the sketch, thinking about how he faced Michael without looking away. His courage scared me because I wasn't sure I had it in me to be that brave. I thought of New York, where judging looks were just background noise, but here in Asheville, they felt personal, like everyone knew my story. Later, I stopped by Moonlit Brew to pick up a book I'd left behind. Emma saw me and immediately asked, "What's wrong, Luke? You look like you saw a ghost." I told her about the market, leaving out the parts about Ryan. She frowned and said, "Michael Brown thinks the world spins by his rules, but it doesn't." Her words were simple, but they hit me, making me wonder if I wanted to keep hiding forever. I went back home, but thoughts of Ryan and Michael wouldn't let go. His courage, his hurt, his smile, they all swirled in my head. Would I go to him to talk, or let fear win again? Ryan texted me, suggesting a night drive on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and despite my fear, I said yes. When he picked me up in his pickup, his smile was so warm it felt like my walls were starting to crumble. We drove along the winding road, windows down, wind rushing in my ears, and I stole glances at him, at his hands steady on the wheel. Why does this moment feel so right but scare me to my core? We pulled over at a lookout where the mountains loomed dark under the starry sky. Ryan grabbed a blanket from the trunk, spread it on the grass, and said, "Sit, Luke, this is the best view in Asheville." We lay side by side, staring at the stars, and he started talking about his dream, recording an album people would listen to when they felt alone. "I want my music to feel like a home, you know? A place where you're safe," he said, his voice so earnest I couldn't help but share my own dream, showing my paintings in a gallery, letting them speak for me when I stay silent. The conversation flowed easily, like we'd known each other for years. I told him about New York, how the city broke me but taught me to draw emotions. He listened without interrupting, and I felt his gaze warming me, like a soft light. At some point, he turned to me, his face so close I could see every eyelash. "Luke, do you ever just do what you want without overthinking?" he asked quietly. I wanted to answer, but the words caught in my throat because he leaned in and kissed me. His lips were warm, soft, and in that moment, the world shrank to that touch, to the electricity coursing through me. It was so gentle, so right, but fear, as always, reared its head. I pulled back, muttering, "I'm not ready, Ryan, I'm sorry." He looked at me, not with hurt but with understanding, and nodded. "It's okay, look. We're not in a rush," he said, his voice so calm I almost believed I could be braver. We lay there a while longer, silent, but his hand rested near mine, close enough that I felt the warmth of his skin. I wanted to hold his hand, but fear froze me again. When he drove me home, I thanked him for the night, and he smiled, "You know where to find me." I closed my apartment door, but the feeling of his lips, his closeness, stayed with me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much I wanted to be closer to him, but fear still kept me caged. Would I take the next step, or pull back again? After that night on the Blue Ridge Parkway, I couldn't get Ryan out of my head, his warm lips, his steady gaze promising he wouldn't push me. But instead of going to him, I hid, avoiding Moonlit Brew and ignoring his texts that came with gentle persistence. I felt guilty, but the fear of being vulnerable was stronger. Why can't I just let myself be happy? My apartment became a hideout where I got lost in sketches and unfinished illustrations, but every drawing I started turned into Ryan, his smile, his hands, his silhouette against the mountains. I got mad at myself, crumpled the pages, and tossed them in the corner, but it didn't help. Emma noticed something was off when I stopped by the café for coffee, careful not to look at the stage where Ryan might show up any second. "Luke, you look like you haven't slept in a week," she said, setting a mug in front of me. "What's going on? Is it that guitar guy?" I muttered something about being busy with work, but her look said she wasn't buying it. One evening, walking home through downtown Asheville, the light from the cafe's windows stopped me. I froze across the street, watching Ryan tune his guitar on stage. He looked so confident, so alive, and his voice, when he started singing, gave me chills. I stood there, hiding behind a lamppost, feeling his music pull me closer, but my feet wouldn't move. When he finished, someone in the crowd shouted, "That was for someone special, right?" Ryan smiled, but his eyes scanned the room, and I swore he was looking for me. I left without going inside, but his voice stayed with me, like the warmth of his hand that night. At home, I opened my sketchbook and started drawing, not scribbling out, but letting the lines flow. It was Ryan, sitting on stage, guitar in hand, the lamp's light making his face soft, almost glowing. I stared at the drawing and felt something stir inside me, not fear, but a desire, warm and insistent, to be near him, to listen to him, to touch his hand without panicking. Before bed, I found his latest text, "Luke, I'll be at the cafe tomorrow. Just come if you want." I read it over and over, my heart beating a little faster each time. I wanted to reply, to say I'd be there, but my fingers froze on the screen. Lying in the dark, I thought about how his voice sounded that night, how his closeness made me feel alive. Would I finally step past my fear and go to him? The River Arts District Festival buzzed around me, music, laughter, the smell of fresh paint, but I only saw Ryan on stage, his guitar, his voice wrapping around me like a distant embrace. My paintings hung in a nearby gallery, but I couldn't focus on the visitors because his song, so raw and honest, felt like a confession. Why do his words make my heart race so hard when I'm still scared to get closer? I hadn't gone to the cafe since that night I saw him through the window, but Ryan still found ways to reach me. His texts came less often, but each one carried warmth, like he knew I was just lost in my head. When I learned we'd both be at the festival, me with my art, him with his music, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I wanted to see him but feared he'd ask why I'd vanished. Still, I showed up, set up my work, and waited, not even sure for what. Ryan performed with a small band, and the crowd cheered as he finished his first song. Then he grabbed the mic and said, "This one's for someone who's afraid to shine, but I know he can." His eyes found mine in the crowd, and I felt my face heat up. The song was slow, its words about finding light in the dark, and I knew it was about me. I was angry. How dare he call me out so openly in front of everyone? But his voice, his courage, melted something inside me. After his set, he walked over to me at my exhibit. "Luke, you're not hiding from the world, you're hiding from yourself," he said softly, his hand brushing mine, sending a warm, terrifying spark through me. I wanted to argue, to say he didn't get it, but his gaze was so gentle I just mumbled, "I'm trying." He smiled, and in that moment his closeness, his scent, coffee and fresh wood, wrapped around me like a blanket on a cold night. We stood among my paintings, and he looked at each one, asking about them. His questions were simple but genuine, and I felt my walls crumbling with every word. When he said, "Your art is you, Luke, it's so alive," I didn't want to hide for the first time in forever. I wanted to be closer, to feel his warmth, but the crowd around us reminded me we weren't alone. He left to prep for his next set, and I stayed, staring at my paintings, which suddenly felt braver than I was. I knew I needed to talk to him, to tell him his song touched me. But would I find the courage to approach him again? I never thought I could feel so exposed, standing in front of someone with a drawing in my hands, like I was handing over a piece of my soul I'd kept hidden for so long. After the festival, I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan, his song, how his words made me want to be braver. I went to a queer meetup in downtown Asheville, where people shared stories of accepting themselves, and their voices, full of pain and hope, gave me a push. I decided I was done running. Clutching the portrait of Ryan I'd drawn that night, I went to his place, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out every doubt. Would he see me for who I really am? The queer meetup was in a cozy room with soft lights and the smell of herbal tea. People talked about families who turned them away, about love that helped them heal, and I listened, feeling their words lift a weight off my shoulders. One guy, with a tattoo on his wrist, said, "Love isn't about being perfect, it's about being real." Those words stuck with me, and I knew I wanted to be real with Ryan, even if it scared me to my core. I knocked on his apartment door, gripping the folder with the drawing. When he opened it, his eyes widened with surprise but softened instantly. "Luke, you're here," he said, his voice so warm it eased my tension. He invited me in, and I noticed a guitar in the corner, a stack of sheet music on the table, the smell of fresh coffee. His place was like him, cozy, alive, open. I showed him the portrait, his face lit by stage lights, his smile full of radiance. "This is you," I said, my voice shaking. "I drew it because you make me feel something real." He stared at the drawing for a long time, then looked at me, his eyes so tender I could barely breathe. "Luke, this is incredible," he said, his hand brushing mine, soft but sure, like he knew I wouldn't run. We sat on his couch and he asked why I came. I told him about the meetup, how I'd been scared to open up after New York, but his songs, his courage, gave me hope. He listened, never looking away, and at some point he leaned closer. "Luke, I want you to know, I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. Then he kissed me, and this kiss was different, not rushed, but deep, like a promise. I kissed him back, feeling fear melt in the warmth of his closeness, in his arms that held me like I was home. When we pulled apart, I said, "I want to try. With you." He smiled, pulled me closer, and we sat there, wrapped in each other, listening to a silence that didn't scare me anymore. But what would happen when the world outside his door came knocking? I never thought gossip could spread faster than a wildfire, but in Asheville, news about me and Ryan reached the suburbs like someone sent rumors flying on the mountain breeze. After that night at his place, wrapped up on his couch, I felt alive, like I was breathing fully for the first time. But the moment we walked out holding hands, neighbors' stares got sharper, and whispers behind us got louder. Michael Brown, that stern-faced farmer, decided his mission was to remind everyone that people like us don't fit in his world. Why does happiness always come with a fight? It all started at a suburban town hall meeting where Michael stood up and declared that city ways are corrupting our youth. I heard about it from Emma, who caught the gossip at the café. "He mentioned Ryan, Luke, and not in a kind way," she said, pouring coffee like she was ready to chuck the pot at Michael. My stomach twisted, but Ryan, sitting next to me, just laughed. "Let him talk," he said, squeezing my hand. "I'm not hiding, but I won't make you either." His words were a breath of fresh air, but I still worried this could hurt my work or his gigs. Emma, true to form, didn't sit idly by. She decided to throw a support night at Moonlit Brew, calling it Freedom Night. "If the suburbs want to whisper, we'll throw a party to drown them out," she announced, stringing rainbow flags all over the cafe. I didn't know whether to laugh or panic, but her energy was infectious. Ryan jumped in to perform, and I, though nervous, agreed to bring a few sketches for a pop-up exhibit. "You're an artist, Luke, show them who you are," he winked, and I couldn't say no. The night at the cafe felt like a mini rebellion. People danced to Ryan's music, his voice ringing out like a challenge to every judging stare. Emma handed out free rainbow-frosted cupcakes, and the local bartender, a guy with a brow piercing, put on a show juggling bottles. I stood by my drawings, feeling strangers' smiles and kind words wash away my fear. A girl with bright blue hair said, "Your art's so alive, like it's telling stories." I smiled, Ryan's warmth beside me giving me courage. But there were surprises. Mid-evening, a guy from the suburbs, one of Michael's buddies, stormed in, grumbling, "What? You're throwing these kinds of things now?" Ryan, without missing a beat, dedicated a playful song to him about hearts afraid to love, and the room erupted in laughter. The guy turned red and left, and I watched Ryan sing with such ease, thinking how I wanted to be that free. When the night ended, Ryan and I took down flags, laughing about Emma dancing with the bartender. "We did this, Luke," he said, pulling me into a hug, and his warmth chased away my last doubts. After that wild night at Moonlit Brew, I realized I wanted to be with Ryan not just in the quiet of his apartment but out in the world, even if that world wasn't always ready for us. The final day of the River Arts District Festival was our chance, mine to show paintings inspired by him, his to sing a song about us. We decided to perform together, and it felt like jumping off a cliff, full of fear and thrill. What would you do if love gave you a chance to be yourself in front of everyone? My paintings hung in the gallery, each one a piece of our story. Ryan at the waterfall, his silhouette under the stars, his smile on stage. I was nervous as visitors studied them, but their whispers were full of awe, not judgment. Ryan performed on the main stage, and when he said, "This song's for the person who became my light," my heart stopped. His voice, soft yet powerful, sang of a road, of love that teaches you to be braver, and I knew every word was about me. When he finished, the crowd cheered, and I spotted a few familiar faces from the suburbs, including Michael Brown, whose stare was cold but silent. I braced for a jab, but instead, someone shouted, "That was amazing!" Ryan came off stage, walked to me, and we stood together by my paintings. "Luke, look at them," he said, nodding at the crowd. "They see us and it's okay." His hand found mine, and I squeezed it, his warmth chasing away my last doubts. We talked to people who came up to praise my art or thank Ryan for his music. Emma, beaming like a rainbow flag, hugged us both and said, "You two are like a painting and a song that fit perfectly together." I laughed, not hiding my joy for the first time. In that moment, I realized Asheville, with all its contrasts, had become my home, not because of the mountains or streets, but because of Ryan, because of us. As the festival ended, Ryan and I stood at the edge of the field, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. I turned to him and said, "You're my home." He smiled, pulled me close, and we kissed under the applause of those still lingering nearby. It wasn't just a kiss, it was our answer to the world, a promise to keep going together. What would you say to the person who helped you find your home in this world? But the story doesn't end here. Ryan and I keep living, painting, singing, facing whispers and smiles. I want to ask you, viewers, what does it mean to be brave in love? Have you faced judgment and found the strength to move forward? Share your stories in the comments. I know they're just as important as ours. What's next for me and Ryan? Maybe a new painting, a new song, or just a quiet night together. But one thing's for sure, we'll be together, and this is just the beginning.